occurs to me that politics, it has become a sport, but it's become there's so much animosity and necessarily oppositional, rather than trying to find a way to live together and work together. How do we address that?
I think politics is a bad environment in which to address that. And I mean, although I think you would say that, well, at times anyway, maybe not all that lately, but at times there is, among Democrats and Republicans, among liberals and conservatives who are up at the General Assembly trying to make laws, trying to get through a session, there starts to be a certain camaraderie in the foxholes at times that maybe isn't even that apparent on the outside. You wind up, if you're going to hate somebody, you actually probably hate them on a personal level more than, like, I don't like that person because I don't like that person. But so politics, there is that anyway among the people who are practicing it at Roberta's level. But I feel as though, I will say one very personal thing, which is one thing that's changed me a lot in the last year, and I'm not saying this just to suck up to Wisdom House, is that I started going to church every day. Every Sunday. And every day would be a lot, but every Sunday. And a couple of things have happened to me there. One of them is I made a very good Republican friend there. I'm a Democrat. And I have a very good I've had good Republican friends in the past. This isn't the first time, but like every week, and this is somebody who's pretty heavily, it's Greg Butler, who's like pretty heavily involved in the Republican Party. I mean, he's like a big donor. He's like, and so we just talk about this stuff every day, and it's in a pretty safe environment because we're there for some other reason. And I find myself reacting, not perfectly, but better to a lot of things. Like, here's a concrete example. All right, from a lot of my career, I spent way too much of my career trying to help people understand that John Rowland was not a good governor, and that people shouldn't trust him, and blah, 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 blah. And then even when he was driven out of office, I thought, well, people still don't understand this and how bad it was, and all. And I really became this sort of Ahab-like feeling inside me that I was not entirely comfortable with. And so of late, he's really been down on his luck. And there was this piece that ran a couple of days ago about how he's still awaiting possible sentencing a second time, and he's been working as a wedding planner. And like,
wrap your head around that.
Yeah, exactly. And this would have either caused in me glee or made me think, well, here's a satirical piece I can write. John Rowland planned your wedding. I mean, it just writes itself, right? But I just kind of felt sad, and I just sort of thought, well, I don't want to write that piece, and I don't want to make fun of him, and it's over. But I feel like a year ago I wouldn't have had that gone quite there, and I think probably spending a little bit of time, in a more spiritual context, just being forced to think about these things in that way periodically, it would get me closer to the kind of conciliation you're talking about, Jack, than politics at will.
Anytime you talk about the arts, it sounds it makes me feel kind of fatigued. But let's talk about no, really. It's like we all understand what that means, which it's meant to challenge. But in that, there's a commonality that we have of all starting looking at a painting from the same position that we don't feel when we're looking at a headline or thinking about a political issue. That we're more willing to share our vulnerability when we're approaching the arts than approaching politics.
I mean, I see it more as a positive kind of energy, a kind of agape or something being activated. I hope it's not just fatigue.
Oh, no. I know what you mean from meeting this guy in church and relating on a different level. Yes.
Yeah, but I don't know, because there's two things that have to happen here. And one of them is that obviously we've got to be nice and nicer to one another than we've been in recent decades. On the other hand, artists still have this role to play. It's funny, because back in the green room we were talking about fools and jesters, and like in Shakespeare, the fool can say things to Lear that nobody else can say, and that's sort of a role that all artists play. We're all fools at some level like that. And one reason I'm happy that Roberta is here today is that she, among politicians, there are times where you need to find somebody who's in politics to say, this is crazy, right? Okay, right? I mean, I'm not going crazy. This is, I'll tell just a real quick story.
Oh, no.
Oh, yeah. I think the statute of limitations is over.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So I can't remember whether you leaked this to me or I found it on my own and then I got in touch with you. I think we were both working on parallel tracks here. But we discovered that this high-ranking official in education he had a mace. What did he have beside? There was a mace and there was something else.
Oh, my God. You're really good. That's
Yeah.
right.
A mace and was it a crown?
And a medallion.
He had a medallion, and a mace and a
Right.
medallion. And these things cost thousands of dollars, and at least one of them was being paid for by the taxpayers, and the other one was being paid by some kind of foundation that was probably,
People donated money to,
yeah.
thinking it was going to scholarships.
We're going to scholarships. Instead, he was buying this stuff called it's called academic regalia. And I guess if you're the head of some big, this is like the higher education system of the state of Connecticut, and so, I mean, it was so great to have Roberta to go to and say, this seems like really crazy. This seems insane that somebody who's essentially a public official, taxpayer money is being used to buy a mace. It wasn't the kind of mace that you swing and hit somebody with. It was like this thing, it was more like a scepter, I guess.
Right.
Kind of ceremonial, what they call
Right.
it. And I mean, then you feel like you have to be the fool, right? You have to be the fool who will say, well, that's absurd. You, the king with the mace there, you the guy, you got to put that down. That's not right. But there aren't that many politicians, I'm not just saying this because you're here, who will join you in the spirit of that. Most of them don't want to have that conversation.
But actually, this is something that you're seeing in coverage of political campaigns now. They're starting to reawaken because there are so many emperors without any clothes.
Well, the question is about books and books influencing politics and the influence of Uncle Tom's Cabin, which obviously was this kind of radicalizing book. And for a long time, it was the most read book in China, the most read American literature of any kind in China. They saw this as this very prophetic, crypto-Maoist document. Although I think the story about Abraham Lincoln saying, this is the little lady, he supposedly met Harry Beecher Stowe and said, this is the little lady who started this great war. I think that's completely apocryphal.
Right.
And I think afterwards, I think afterwards they did meet, and she afterwards said, I don't think he even knew who I was, or something like that. Yeah. I think she said, dude didn't know who I was.
What's really rewarding for me is when you're changing norms. That is, when I think of some of the things that I've been involved with in the last 16 years I've been in the legislature, we did civil unions, same-sex marriage, and when we started having that conversation, that was so controversial. We were told, you take a position on this issue, you'll never get elected to public office again, just that. And now here we are, in a very short time span, where the tables have been completely turned, where politicians try to outdo each other on who's more friendly to, and
Except in North Carolina.
yeah, except in North Carolina. Well, exactly.
Except in North Carolina.
But that's where literature, that's where cartoons all play such an important role in reshaping people's thinking, because if that part doesn't happen, then I really can't do my job that well. It makes it that much more challenging. So, Colin's columns, has helped to move thinking in Connecticut.
It's the only book she ever wrote. Well, I mean, she wrote another one
Right.
later, but that was not a book written for a political purpose. She wrote that out of her own experience. And it was a book about her life, which is what made it such a beautiful, timeless book that everybody loves. But that's what changed everything. And it de facto became a political book because it was so truthful.
That people have such a negative connotation, they don't realize so much around them is politics.
Right.
And that when people say, one of the things that's fingernails on a blackboard for me is when people say, I'm not into politics, or some.
Yeah.
Well, that's a political statement in itself, so.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then I, launch into this diatribe of, what you shouldn't be saying that. But that's a very painful thing for me to hear as someone who's felt that my involvement has been about getting people into the process, getting them to participate, getting them to express their views in art form or just participating and being activists. on issues. So those are all very important connections to make, but everything we do, you know, they say the cradle to grave is politics.
That, you know, so much of art and the arts are asking what if. And I do feel as though, just in the same way that art in many ways prepared the way for greater acceptance of gay marriage. I mean, I don't know, I've been looking lately at a lot of young adult fiction. It's amazing how much of it is dystopian or dystopic in nature, and specifically gets into what the world will be like if you don't do anything about climate change. It's like, I almost feel bad for all these 15-year-old kids who are reading these books, except that they need to be reading these books because, in fact, this isn't, you know, some pipe dream, it's a reality. And I'm wondering, for you, as somebody who creates, people who sculpt, I think, don't engage in conscious acts exactly about that, but is there a lot of what if, you know? Like, what if is such an important question?
I tend to go into the studio after I listen to NPR. Here I go again.
Go to the lie detector.
And you have all these ideas, dropping your kids off at school, and you're doing your 18,000 different things, being very active community member, volunteering a lot, and then you come in and you got all this material laying around, and I don't think, what if? I don't think of like, well, what am I going to make today? Just kind of plunge into the material that feels like what I need to work, like if it's carving wood. And I think something that linked what you were just saying, Roberta, and Colin, what you were saying is the 2 weeks after Sandy Hook, having two young boys the same age, going into the studio and making this light floating, beautiful little boat with all 20 of the little ones. And I was sitting at the table, and I had to make it for myself. I didn't think of politics. I didn't think of anything other than I gotta breathe. I need to do this. So I made this beautiful little airy vessel, which is actually, I brought it, so it's in the show. And I finished, and I just sent the image to a few of my friends, and it kind of just went poof. The image just had a life of its own, people posting it all over, and it kind of, I was taken aback because I was like, what's going on here? And then it was exhibited in Newtown like 2 months after the event. And a father who lost his child called me up, and he said, introduced himself. He wanted to know why I made it, and then he said, I want to thank you for giving me another image, giving us another image to hold on to replace, you know, the horror, some of the horror, all of it horror. And I thought, I hung up the phone and I wept for two weeks after that. I thought, the power of art, like the gut of making that was purely selfish, just to be able to breathe again and to try to work through it in a tangible way. But then seeing the reaction from a family who actually lost their child. And then a week later, I was asked to exhibit it in a show against guns in Connecticut. I'm like, no, I don't want to politicize it. Mm-hmm. This is what I thought. I'm like, I don't want politics, this angry debate involved with that. That's a prayer for the babies and for the family. And so that was one of those interesting decisions I had to make, that I didn't want to choose a side, but I'm like, no, leave it alone. Just leave it alone. When I moved from Chicago 10 years ago to New Haven, and I'm like, well, I'm an hour closer to New York, and oh, by golly, I'm getting in there. And, wonderful. Of course, it has a thriving, incredible art scene. But you know what, if these are the little golden nuggets that we're after, just forget about it. You know how many times I go in the street, I'm like, oh my gosh, just forget about it. Just, it is a little rat race in and of itself, too. It's a little bit who you know and this kind of stuff. And again, there have been such profound, deeply meaningful responses of the heart and of the mind and of the intellect of why you do what you do, that you have got to just close your eyes to all the other mess that tells you if you're successful or not. I'm not. I am for myself, and I see the way people respond, and I'm very, very humbled and grateful. But am I a big big cheese, heck no.
I do my show with several other people, with producers. And the one rule that I've put in is that if something seems like a really bad idea that wouldn't make a very good radio show, we should try to do it. Ideas that have been laughed off by other people are things that we should really try to do. And often this involves picking something that's sort of, there in people's lives that they don't look at very much and see very much, and seeing if we can do an entire 49-minute conversation with interesting guests about those things. Now, this has led to some real incredible disasters, which people like to bring up later. But I mean, that's the other rule that we have. I say to all the people who work on the show, you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to fall flat on your face, and otherwise you get nothing out of this. And so, but it does mean that sometimes we will do we did a show, I'll just mention two in particular. One was this producer said, well, I was thinking about doing a show about dioramas, and everybody laughed at him. And I said, okay, we're doing the show now. So everybody laughed at that. Yeah, we're going to do a show. And it was actually a pretty interesting show about dioramas. And dioramas turned out to have been used in lots of different ways, and of course their existence right now is kind of challenged by other forms of digital representation, and they seem kind of musty. So, and then I have this producer who really thinks out of the box a lot. I guess that's a horrible cliche, but he came to me and he said he wanted to do something about something that's dying, something that's jeopardized, and he thought it was languages. And he kept coming back to me, and he finally came back to me and he said, I'd like to do a show about sign language and Braille, because they're both languages that or sign language is a language, Braille is a representational language, but they're both challenged by new technologies, and there's some real questions about how long they're going to last. And he said, one of the things I want you to do, I want you to interview somebody who's deaf through a sign language interpreter. And it turned out this idea had been suggested for another show 5 years ago at the same station, and everybody said, you want us to put a deaf person on the radio? And so we put a deaf person on the radio. It was like one of the greatest things. I mean, it was, I can say this because I had so little role in it. Somebody else thought it up, and then this guy was really interesting, and he was being interpreted by a woman who, when you do the sign, communicating with him in sign and then communicating back to me in the radio audience in voice, one thing she has to do too is imagine his intonations, make the music of that happen too. And it was actually this really incredibly moving experience for me. I really don't know why, but I was kind of verklempt at the end of this interview. But I sort of thought, well, yeah, because you have to be willing, you have to measure success a different way, like this seems like a really bad idea, let's do it.